Moscow has pressed the West to lift sanctions against Russia over the war in Ukraine, seeking to shift the blame for a growing food crisis worsened by Kyiv's inability to ship millions of tons of grain and other agricultural products because of the conflict. A senior UN official is due to visit Moscow in the coming days to discuss reviving fertilizer exports. Russia's UN ambassador Vasily Nebenzia has stressed that the talks were not linked to a resumption of Ukrainian grain shipments. Since Russia invaded Ukraine February 24, Ukrainian grain shipments from its Black Sea ports have stalled. Moscow says the chilling effect of Western sanctions imposed on Russia over the war have disrupted its fertilizer and grain exports. Here's more in this report.
Time is running out to export some 22 million tons of grain out of Ukraine before the country's new harvest, as Russian forces continue to block the country's Black Sea ports. According to Ukrainian officials, Ukraine's Black Sea ports have been blocked since Russia sent thousands of troops into Ukraine on February 24th, and millions of tons of grain remain stuck in silos in the country.
Crop is important, but crop is a part of a big mechanism. Ukraine is really one of the best, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say the best, but one of the big agricultural countries in the world. And it's not just about crop. It's about all the rest, which is making the food security and the livelihood of all the Ukrainians. And this is also, we have to think about it, because if the Ukrainians have a good livelihood and a good capacity, they're going to continue to produce also. You know, everything has been linked.
But with the ports of Odessa, Chernomorsk and others cut off from the world by Russian warships, the grain supply can only travel on Ukraine's congested land routes that are far less efficient.
Odessa has to be reopened, and we need to have an agreement to have it reopened. This diplomatic level has to be discussed with people who can solve the situation, and then we need to have an agreement. As FAO, our Director General also reminded that.
Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has accused Russia of trying to blackmail the international community by raising the possibility of unblocking Ukraine's Black Sea port in return for a relaxation of sanctions against Russia.
I think that there won't be any one destination for Ukrainian corn or any other products where we should focus completely. I think we should just segregate and multiply our optionality and just send it to Polish, send it to Germany, send it to Klaipėda port and certainly to Romania. It's what we should do. It's not like an ideal situation where we should make a focus. Even Germany, that's a really good opportunity. Like say Hamburg, Rostock ports are quite effective there.
European Commission chief and other leaders have called for talks with Moscow on unlocking wheat exports trapped in Ukraine by the sea blockade.
Saying with the grain shipments at the Black Sea, one more reaction is coming from British Foreign Minister Liz Truss, who accused Russian president of holding the world to ransom over food, responding to a question about whether she supported lifting sanctions in exchange for grain exports from Ukraine. Just yesterday, the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko was cited by the Interfax news agency as saying that Moscow was ready to provide a humanitarian corridor for vessels carrying food to leave Ukraine in return for the lifting of some sanctions.
This country's tragic history is a reminder of what happens when we fail to stand up to aggression. Things get worse, they don't get better. The Srebrenica genocide, the siege of Sarajevo were just two of the atrocities that left us appalled. We said never again, that we would never let this happen in Europe again. And yet what we are seeing today in this country are signs of Russian interference which risk plunging us back into those dark days. This must be stopped, and the United Kingdom stands with our friends in this country to stop this from happening. Today, the United Kingdom is announcing a new investment package into the Western Balkans. This is about providing honest, reliable investment into industries like energy and infrastructure as an alternative to strings-attached investment, which leads to malign influence. We're aiming to mobilise $100 million of UK-backed investment into the Western Balkans by 2025. This is in addition to the export support that we're supplying through UK export finance.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military says Russia has the military advantage in the fight in the eastern Luhansk region, but they are doing everything they can. Meanwhile, Serhiy Haidai, the governor of Luhansk, acknowledged that Russian forces were retreating before Moscow's offensive in the eastern Donbass region beset the last road out of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk remain outside Russian control. The VOA's Anna Chenikova joins us now from Kiev for more on the situation. Hello, Anna. Let's begin with President Volodymyr Zelensky warning that Moscow is seeking to destroy the industrial Donbass region, where it has, focused its attacks. How bad are things there?
Hello, good evening. Well, this is quite true, and unfortunately, we can clearly see that industrial areas and civilian, especially private areas, are under the most of the attacks. And to be honest, if to look at the map and if to look at all the cities which are on the way of Russian troops, we can clearly see, and both from the intelligence information and also from the satellites, that basically all these cities are just, landed. So it just nothing left, and it's only land and fire in there. And unfortunately, this is a tactic that Russian forces are using in order to reach their goal, as what was announced by Russian Minister of Defense, that they have to get to the administrative borders of Luhansk and Donetsk regions ASAP. And we can see that this is quite true, that they do everything, but unfortunately they do not take over cities, they just take over ruins. And this is exactly what Mr. Zelensky is also pointed out at, and also Ukrainian government and military officials. The main, and unfortunately also the main attacks are mostly at the civilian infrastructure, into logistic infrastructure in particular, and a lot of civilians are dying. And also what we know from the official sources, that as of today, and of course this would change and probably worsen, we have at least twice more civilians dead than military. So this is probably the result of these tactics by Russian forces.
Indeed, really sad reports coming from there. But if one were to ask who controls what in Ukraine, specifically the Donbass region, what answer would you give? Because we're hearing reports, several analysts who are saying that it appears Russia is winning that war.
Well, it's difficult to say, either winning or keeping territories for now. If we look at the situation, we see that for the moment, definitely most of Luhansk and Donetsk region are under the Russian control. As we know from the latest reports, Luhansk, only 10%, like around 10%, 7 to 10% of Luhansk region is under Ukrainian control. But again, we have to also understand and look deeper into that, because these areas are partly occupied since 2014, and definitely this was, kind of a front line for all these 8 years. And Ukrainian forces are getting also their position, so it's not just that they're leaving and just run away or just try to avoid these territories. No, they're also moving to other positions, and they're staying still there, as our main military chief said today. And basically, this is just, the positioning. And of course, Ukrainian military is waiting for the West support and for the equipment, which should come soon. Sooner or later anyway. So there are expectations that in the late summer, It might be the counter-attack. And counter-attack, of course, probably, we cannot say for sure, and we're not military experts in the field, but, well, probably it would start from Donbass. So for the moment, we can say that most of the Donbass region is under Russian control. If they're winning or not, well, it's too early to say.
All right, Anna, and we're also reading, about 8,000 Ukrainian prisoners of war, we understand, are being held in the self-proclaimed Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republic. This is from a Russian-backed separatist. But then the Russian Defense Ministry is saying that it is promising a sort of safe corridor to allow foreign ships to leave the Black Sea ports, with another corridor for ships to leave Mariupol. Do you see them living up to this promise, considering the threat to food insecurity around the world?
We know, and we hear the report that reportedly Turkey is having talks with Russia and Ukraine. We don't have any official confirmations from the Ukrainian authorities so far. This is true that we also heard from Russian side that they might demine Mariupol port to involve it in that. But again, for the moment, it's definitely not clear if this could happen. If this is true and if these reports are correct that Turkey is trying to negotiate this kind of corridors, this of course would be a great deal. But again, it's a question of what negotiation is about. So what should Ukraine give away or not giving away? So, I mean, we don't know the terms of these negotiations and there are no official comments. In terms of Mariupol, well, of course, Ukraine has not particular information on what's happening in there. Intelligence has, but again, we don't know much from there. But what we know is that Mariupol port was very much covered with mines. So it's really difficult to say how fast could Russian forces demine this area. We know that a couple of days ago, there were reports that during the demining procedure at the Azovstal and at the sea line, 4 Russian soldiers were injured very badly because of the mines. So again, this is just, a question of time, and I just suggest we wait for the official comments from the Ukrainian government.
And Anna, on the question of territory, the New York Times editorial board said earlier this month that a negotiated peace might require Kyiv to make some hard decisions, given that the, military victory, or rather it says decisive military victory, was not realistic. How does President Zelensky feel about this?
Very negative. I think that President Zelensky is very united here with Ukrainian society. If we look back 3 months ago, no one would expect that Ukraine would survive 3 days of this, into this war. Now we are more than 3 months into this war, and it's definitely, quite not correct to say that Ukraine cannot win. Even more, we understand, I think everyone understands that the battle is happening on the territory of Ukraine by the Ukrainian army. But of course, it wouldn't be possible without Western support, US support, European support. So basically, if Ukraine doesn't win, then all these partners doesn't win as well. And this is just this huge victory of Russia. I don't think it's really a great, point of view and, thing of, positioning of this situation, because we want to talk, and I think that the whole world wants to talk about the peace, not illusion of compromise, not illusion of peace. If the world would give Russia the opportunity to win here, to win now, then, we'll get a lot of other problems. We'll get, this kind of a principle of impunity that aggressor can actually go forward, go on, go further. And definitely this is not going to stop other leaders, like either next leaders in Russia when Putin is gone and there will be someone else. This person will probably continue the same way of, behavior because, well, no one did anything, like it was okay. Also, we should also consider that it's not only about Ukraine here. It's basically, well, it's big time about the whole world, because there are quite, a lot of countries around the world that consider probably, starting war or starting aggression to the neighboring country. Let's take Taiwan, for example, in China, So this is very, I think that everyone should be very careful when putting these things this way, because under Ukrainian constitution, Ukraine's integrity and territorial integrity in particular is not under the question. So Ukraine would never say, well, okay, let us give this territory or that territory and create peace, because, well, peace is not created this way. And this is the position of Ukrainian government and President Zelensky. And also he mentioned this in Davos, that everyone should be very careful, because here and now in Ukraine, unfortunately, with Ukrainian blood and the life of Ukrainians, we are creating, well, a new security in the world, a new security system. And everyone probably is starting to accepting this, because we can see that, unfortunately, in the 21st century, Europe is under the war again. So definitely, this article by New York Times created a lot of discussions here inside the country, and I know also abroad. But I think that everyone should be very careful and should go, should just take decision for peace, but not illusion of peace.
All right. So finally, Anna, just give us a position of Ukraine, President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people on this, because we also heard this at the Davos meeting, that Ukraine should let Russia keep Crimea, which it annexed in 2014.
Ukrainian position is very clear, and Ukrainian position was presented by the President of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky. The complete victory for Ukraine, and victory as itself, would be the returning of all the territories. So we are not talking only about territories before the 24th of February. We're talking about all the territory which is recognized by the international society and under all the documents, and by Russia as well, as integrity territory of Ukraine. So Ukrainian government, Ukrainian president, everyone, and Ukrainian society, for sure, is not ready to give away territories. And we just had recent questionnaire for the society, and we have 82% of Ukrainians who are not supporting giving up territories, and this is a huge amount. And this is probably would be the answer, because for Ukraine it's important to give all the territories back. Ukraine doesn't want anything additional, just the territories which are recognized by the international society.
All right, Anna, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Do continue to stay safe. We've been talking to VOA's Anna Chernikova live from Kyiv. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
The father of 10-year-old Jacqueline Cazares, one of the victims of the deadly rampage at a Texas elementary school, says his daughter would do anything for anyone. 21 people died, 19 of them children, in what is now being referred to as the deadliest school shooting since December 2012, when a gunman killed 26 people, including 20 children, at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Valde, deep in the Texas Hill Country region, about 18 miles west of San Antonio, has about 16,000 residents, nearly 80% of them Hispanic or Latino. That's according to U.S. Census data. Like Newtown, it is a close-knit community of strong family connections and friendships.
She's the one to help her friends in need there and then. Well, we were at the hospital about 2.5 hours.
Meanwhile, hundreds of people gathered in Uvalde last night just to remember the victims of the deadly shooting at Robb Elementary School. Many who attended appeared dazed by what had just unfolded in their community, the murder of 19 children and 2 adults by an 18-year-old gunman armed with an AR-15 style rifle.
Families of this community.
While contrasting the mood in the country, an event billed as the largest gathering of Second Amendment attorneys in the country is scheduled to take place in the city of Houston, Texas, tomorrow, Friday, 4 days after authorities said the gunmen killed at least 19 children and 2 teachers at the elementary school in Texas. Crews have unpacked boxes at the George R. Brown Convention Center and signs on windows welcoming visitors to 14 acres of guns and gear. As of Wednesday afternoon, the NRA had not announced any changes to its annual meeting, which is scheduled to feature former President Donald Trump, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, and U.S. Senator Ted Cruz as speakers. Organizers of the seminar did not respond to questions about whether Tuesday's school shooting had affected plans for the event. Well, joining us now for more on that, the gun laws, gun control and that shooting is Dr. Courtney Bennett Arroyo, whose expertise is trauma at Loyola University, Maryland, from where she joins us. Dr. Bennett Arroyo, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
Many Americans are shocked by the shooting in Texas, and as the shock wears off, they are angry. What should be the approach to helping them get through this trauma?
Yeah, and so the impact of the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School is likely going to vary depending on the individual, their proximity to this horrific event, whether they've experienced a previous trauma, right, the extent to which they identify with what's happened. And just as you've mentioned, people might initially experience shock that's going to change to anger, helplessness, numbness. So a trauma-informed approach that really engages individuals, the families, and the community more broadly is going to be really important. And there are those of us who may have witnessed this event and are witnessing the impact of this event through news outlets, right, or social media. And that might create for some people what's called a secondary or vicarious trauma. And not to mention that this event has happened 11 days after a mass shooting in Buffalo, and that there have been 213 mass shootings in the United States just in 2022 alone, right? And so there's going to be a layered impact for a lot of people. And just some things people can do to manage that might be kind of taking a break from social media, connecting with a loved one that they feel can support them, maintaining their routine to stay grounded, and also just considering some mental health resources in their area.
And Doctor, we've heard from a father of a 10-year-old who has said that his daughter was one that would do anything for anyone. The parents who have lost children in this attack, how should they grieve this period?
It's devastating, right? And there isn't necessarily one right way to grieve, but even just that there can be a patient or non-judgmental source of support available for the parents, and thinking about that this is a process, right? There isn't necessarily a linear path to grieving, especially the loss of a child. And so just knowing that there's a resource for support, people who are willing to make space for them to talk, willing to make space to be present in their pain, and that there's access to community-based and mental health resources that they could engage in when they feel ready to take that step.
I also know some authorities are doing their best to provide some comfort, which is usual, but what sorts of actions are usually taken during this time for those affected?
Often there's going to be some kind of a community level response, and that's going to be really critical to helping the community heal and start to build resilience, honoring collective healing in the Uvalde community. What are the ways that they connect with each other and support each other, listening to the voices of the students, teachers, and families of Robb Elementary School as a part of that healing process, but making sure there's trained mental health providers and peer support available that can encourage a trauma-informed response in all of the spaces that survivors might come in contact with, right? So that doctors have a trauma-informed response, all the way to teachers, right, who are so important as well. And so just keeping in mind, it's an ongoing journey. People will start to build their own individual skills over time when they're ready to do that. But overall, just making sure that the community is supported and can support each other.
And the children killed in the attack have classmates, friends, best friends, who have to mourn them and remember them probably all their lives. Do children ever outgrow trauma?
Yeah, right. And I think similarly, as I mentioned before, every child's going to have their own way of responding to this attack, this loss. And their healing over time is going to be impacted by a number of factors. A lot of that in terms of the support that they have from their families, their friends, and their communities. And keeping in mind that there's an age range developmentally for the children at Robb Elementary School and how children respond to trauma based on their age. So there might be those changes in just their daily routine. And if they're not talking about what's happened, they might become more moody, their sleep might change. But to just create space to ask questions and to talk about what's happened. Can children heal from trauma? Absolutely. And I think the families, the communities, and the mental health resources that they have access to over time is going to support that process. To honor their voice, acknowledge that they have a voice, and again, creating space for them to talk about it, that it's okay to acknowledge what's happened, to have adults in their life who are modeling some sort of healing process, who are modeling that it's okay to reach out for support and to acknowledge what you're feeling in response to what's happening. And so also trauma-informed approaches in the schools is going to be really important for children, the survivors who are trying to heal from what's happened.
And Doctor, I know you're in the field, the medical field, but I want to get your take on the gun laws in the United States, which is where you live. With all of this happening, I mean, it's an outcry around the world with regards to the recurrence of this nature.
Yeah, and I'm not a policy expert, but what I can say when you think about risk assessment and risk management, even in the mental health field, is in addition to considering what are the individual factors that an individual who may be at risk of harming themselves or others might have, you got to think about the access to means and how accessible are means to act out thoughts. Even of harming an individual. And so that's something that I think is really critical to be thinking about in terms of policymaking and access to firearms in this country. Because again, when you look at that risk management picture, the risk assessment picture, ultimately you're thinking about managing the access to means to act upon a thought or a feeling that is connected to harming self or others.
Thanks again, Dr. Bennett, Courtney Bennett Ario. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, staying in the United States, a statue of George Floyd has been unveiled at a Houston park on the second anniversary of Floyd's death. Floyd, a black man suspected of passing a counterfeit bill, was killed when Derek Chauvin, a white Minneapolis police officer, knelt on his neck May 25, 2020, as 3 other officers looked on. The incident triggered a wave of protests over racial injustice months before President Joe Biden was elected. The sculptor Adrienne Rhizom's work titled Conversation with George shows Floyd seated at a picnic table in Donbass Park. And this is also Floyd spent the majority of his life in Houston before moving to Minneapolis in 2014. In Washington, on the said day, President Biden signed an executive order to reform federal and local policing. Well, away from the United States, the World Economic Forum in Davos has come to an end. It ended today, actually, and will revert to January for its 2023 annual meeting after moving to the spring for the first time due to the coronavirus pandemic. After a hiatus of more than 2 years, the annual gathering in the Swiss ski resort this year attracted a mix of global political business leaders who met amid the usual high security. The next event is scheduled for January 15 to the 20th, 2023.
This week, though, reminded us why it is so important to meet physically with one another. It creates bonds for a lifetime. As we close the meeting, I want to remember all these results we accomplished together in the past week. It is a reminder to all of us that we are better off in a world where we meet and act together than in one where everyone is for themselves. We should recreate a win-win world. Not beggar thy neighbour, but prosper thy neighbour.
Keep it in the ground. Let's keep it in the ground. Climate justice. When do we want it? Now. When? Now. Banken und Konzerne. Brecht die Macht der Banken und Konzerne. Let's keep it in the ground.
Well, on the back of the Davos meeting earlier today, a Ukrainian refugee described the conflict in his home country as one of the first climate wars. At a protest in Davos, originally from Kharkiv, Ilyas Al-Kotbi said he had spent years protesting on climate issues before war broke out in Ukraine. He was one of around 30 protesters who gathered at the Swiss Alpine city to draw attention to climate issues as the World Economic Forum drew to a close.
It's really a tough question for me because I was striking for climate with the Fridays for Future and with my friends from Kharkiv, and I started for striking for a future. I want like a future you deserve in a fair life. And now I see that this climate crisis is happening not in the future. It is just right now, a few years after the movement of Fridays for Future and Greta Thunberg started. And all of this is so absurd because we were demanding to make an urgent climate action. We were demanding to switch to renewables, as the scientists say, to keep it under 1.5 degrees. But now war in Ukraine happens because of fossil energy, because Europe is dependent on fossil energy and can't be in security no longer, as the example of Ukraine shows it right now. So I can call it for sure one of the first climate wars.
So protesting against the inaction of the members of the WEF, against how they're destroying our future and fueling the climate crisis. We have the biggest, the most powerful people in the world here in Davos today in the last few days, and they're not doing anything to combat climate crisis, and we're demonstrating to make that visible.
Staying with issues of climate, ministers from the world's wealthiest democracies will wrangle over how to keep climate change goals on track as they meet in Berlin today. The talks overshadowed by spiraling energy costs, fuel supply worries sparked by the war in Ukraine. Energy, climate and environment ministers from the group of G7 countries want to reaffirm a commitment to cap global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius and protect biodiversity at the meeting. The group will also consider committing to a phase-out of coal-powered generation by 2030, according to a draft communique. The sources suggest that opposition from the US and Japan could derail such a pledge. The draft, which could change considerably by the time talks conclude Friday, would also commit G7 countries to have a net-zero electricity sector by 2035 and to start reporting publicly next year on how they are delivering on past G7 commitment to end inefficient fossil fuel subsidies by 2025.
The message to the world is we are behind. We are not where we need to be post-Glasgow. We need to accelerate dramatically, and we cannot fall into this false narrative that because of Ukraine, there is now an excuse to have to go pump out and build an entire new generation of infrastructure. That will be catastrophic unless it comes with all of the mitigation and abatement, the capturing of emissions. So what the G7 does in order to set the stage for that is really critical. And I'm glad to be here and look forward to completing our work.
Today's G7 energy, climate and environment ministers meeting is taking place in challenging times on all three fronts. As G7 ministers, we have to send a clear message that we agree here in Berlin that our clean transition remains our priority. This is necessary not only to achieve our climate goals, but also to ensure affordable and secure energy.
Particularly with reference to getting Europe off Russian hydrocarbons, I think is our top immediate priority. But we mustn't take our eye off the ball from the medium and long-term objective, which is to get the world to net zero, move decisively further and more quickly into renewable energy. I think nuclear energy is a big part of the answer as well. So really looking forward to our G7 discussions over the coming days here in Berlin.
And to another summit taking place here on the continent. 5 decades after its establishment, the African Development Fund continues to play a key role in improving the lives of millions of people across Africa. Today, the African Development Fund of the African Development Bank, the concessional financing window of the African Development Bank Group, is turning 50. Our correspondent Tenny Olajibwale brings us the latest now. Hi, Tenny. How is the Development Fund marking this milestone, providing low-income African countries, including those in fragile situations, with finance via grants, guarantees, mechanism, and many other concessional loans for 50 years?
Hello guys, so it's quite a huge milestone for the bank, and it's celebrating with a campaign called 50 Voices, 50 Stories, and it's really a series which highlights the lives that have been impacted, the communities that have been impacted by the fund over 50 years, and there's been about 37 beneficiary countries whose stories are being told here today. And it's quite interesting today that also in Ghana, it's been linked to the anniversary of the death of Ghana's former president, Kwame Nkrumah. And people have been linking this to Africa's development and celebrating Africa. As we all know, there's a narrative that sometimes gets told about Africa, and there's really a push here of changing the narrative about Africa, pushing positive stories, stories of development, of Africa's development. So it's just really celebrating the lives that have been impacted over the past 50 years, and also looking to the future on how the ADF can also help boost and continue to support the evolving needs of countries on the continent.
Some who might still say that, you know, it perhaps hasn't had much impact, seeing that some parts of Africa are still grappling with poverty and low socioeconomic development.
Well, the ADF has provided support to about 40 low-income countries, investing $45 billion in about 2,700 operations. These projects include providing electricity for millions of people, improving agriculture and food security, and especially there's also infrastructure, building roads across the continent. And while we've been here, we've heard a lot of success stories. We've heard of the Tanzanian president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, was here, and she spoke a lot about the projects that the ADF has funded in the country, from supporting girls' education to building roads and some other projects. And we've also seen firsthand here some of the projects undertaken by the ADF in Ghana. Notably the four-tier bridge, which has really improved the lives of the people in the area. And you know, of course, there's a lot more that needs to be done, and the AFDB is saying that there's an urgent need to do all this, but it needs more to do more. So you can look at all the countries that have been impacted, but then there's many more that still needs to be done. Many more are still without electricity, and the AFDB is saying that funding is needed. There's still that gap. So it's really a push for more funds so that it can be able to do more. So its impact has been notable, but more is needed for it to do more.
Thanks, Tenny. Tenny live for us there at the African Development Bank meeting taking place in Accra, Ghana. Senegalese President Macky Sall says 11 newborn babies have died in a hospital fire in the western city of Tivaouane. President Sall tweeted that the incident had occurred at the maternity department of the Mame Abdou Aziz Sy Dabakh Hospital. The city's mayor, Demba Diop, says 3 babies were saved. In a statement later, the country's health ministry said an emergency response plan had been put in place and arrangements are being made for the assistance of the families of the victims. And he's Venezuelan. Juan Vicente Perez Mora, declared the oldest person in the world by Guinness World Records last week, will hit 113 years old tomorrow, May 27. Perez Mora, who enjoys good health and a cup of strong aguardiente liquor every day, has 41 grandchildren, 18 great-grandchildren, and 12 great-great-grandchildren. Now, apart from slightly elevated blood pressure and hearing problems due to his age, Perez Mora is in very good health and does not take medication. And this is according to Enrique Guzman, a physician from a clinic in San Jose de Bolivar in Venezuela's Chichira state. Guzman said he considers that with his activity, his hygiene and his diet, he is a person who he thinks will live to see more years. Perez Mora became the world's oldest person after Suantinino de la Fuente Garcia, who was born February 11, 1909 in Spain, died in January, aged 112 years and 341 days old.
Él, para su edad, él está muy bien de salud. Tiene un corazón.
Remarkable. And your multiple award-winning station, Channels Television, has emerged as Brand Africa's most admired Nigerian brand award in a ceremony held in Lagos, where Dangote Group, MTN and others also emerged winners. The results were collated from direct feedback from consumers across Africa using Geopol. Well, our correspondent Olumide Macaulay has more.
The venue in Lagos stands stark against the sky majestic. Like a maestro, the violinist serenades the guests in the foyer. Who the cap fits, let them wear it. The real thrones for the occasion are for some of those seated in the hall, who will emerge as the best brands in Africa.
It's been a wonderful journey, Brand Africa.
A panel ensues which reveal how the best brands are chosen from a Pan-African survey across at least 28 countries that account for over 80% of Africa's population and GDP, using direct mobile web methodology conducted by Geopol.
We've run mobile surveys in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, basically. And we also have about a database of about 250 million people.
The Deputy Governor, Financial System Stability, Central Bank of Nigeria, Aisha Ahmed, delivering the keynote address virtually from Abuja.
Africa has indeed evolved, and through this evolution, the continent continues to rediscover itself and its potential.
Passion for African brands resonates in the speech of the chairman of Brand Africa, South African Tebi Ikalafeng.
Our challenge as Africans is we reject everything that is made in Africa because we think that anything that is not made in Africa elevates us. Our job is to create and to share with the world who we are.
Nigeria's finest marketing communications practitioners.
The big reveal, as the Africa Brand Leadership Excellence Award in Industry goes to advertising doyen, Chairman Troika Group, Dr. Biodun Shobanjo.
51 years ago, when I ventured into the profession that was to define who I eventually became, I'd been carried away by the exploits of such great men as Leo Burnett, Rosa Reeves, David Ogilvy, and Bill Bamback, to mention a few.
Other brands that won awards include Dangote Group for Most Admired Brand that symbolizes African pride, GT Bank for Most Admired Financial Services brand, MTN for #1 brand building African country,
AIT, NTA, #1 most admired Nigerian brand, Channels TV.
And your darling TV station, Channels Television, for Most Admired Nigerian Media Brand. Received by the AGM Operations, Channels Television, Mr. Kingsley Uranta, and Company Secretary, Mrs. Diola Olumio.
We are particularly grateful to Brand Africa and the trustees for choosing Channels Television and for making us this honor. Rest assured, as Africa's most decorated media organization, we would continue to ensure that we entrench or help to entrench good governance, responsible journalism, responsible citizenry in the interest of our country, our dear country, Nigeria, our dear continent, Africa, and indeed the rest of the world. And to our viewers all over the world, thank you for believing in us. Thank you so much.
Some of the criteria used in the survey to choose the best brands in Africa include acceptability, credibility, reliability, and efficiency. If 83% of brands admired by Africans are non-African and only 17% of brands admired by Africans are indeed African, as statistics suggest, then the brands chosen tonight as Africa's best brands are blazing a trail for others to follow. Olumide Makoli, Channels Television News.
One of our many proud moments, and it's all thanks to you. Congratulations to the Channels Media Group. That's it on The World Today. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Have a good evening.